Hi everybody, it's Nikki and I am back with another little vlog to talk about the books that I've read this month. Now I'm going to film this in two parts today, partly because once I hit the 12-minute mark on these longer videos, my camera seems to decide that I've filmed enough and just decides to turn itself off. I haven't been able to find a way to stop it doing that. It just seems to think that 12 minutes is the max. So rather than be cut off mid-speech, I thought I'd split it into two parts. I'll talk about the paperbacks that I've read, have a pause, and then start a new video for the ebooks that I'll then join them together before I put the blog up for you. This will also allow me to flip the video, so don't be surprised if I end up a mirror image version of me. It will just let me flip the video so that the books are not backwards for you. So starting us off, I have my bullet journal here with all my little notes about the books that I've read for the month. So we'll kick off today with this one, Oscar and Lucinda by Peter Carey, who, if you don't know, he's a fairly famous Australian author. I've read a few of his other books. He did one about Ned Kelly that was very good. This one, Oscar and Lucinda, is a historical tale. It's about some of the first settlers coming out to Australia, to New South Wales, and two of the people that end up meeting there and forming an unlikely relationship are Oscar and Lucinda, both of whom are gamblers. They're addicted to gambling, and they've come at it from different ways. So it's kind of a study of them, of their habits, what makes them the people they are, but it's also a study about sort of life in the early colonial days of Australia. So it was a very enjoyable book. I didn't like the ending personally, but that's just me. I think I was expecting something different is the main reason. There's nothing wrong with the ending per se, it's just not what I anticipated. Even so, I'm giving it 4 stars. It was a really good read. Peter Carey is a very readable author. He's got a really great sense of character, and that really comes out in this book in particular. So the next one I read is actually another paperback, although it's up on my shelf, and the reason I haven't got it here to wave at you is because I put it on the top shelf, and I realised that to get it down to do this video I was going to go and have to get the steps out from the kitchen and bring them in, and I was like, it's too much hassle. So sorry, but I won't wave that one at you. The book in question is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. I actually won a copy of this in a giveaway at my local cinema. I'd been to see the film version, which I'd really loved. I read a lot of du Maurier a few years ago, sort of in my early to mid-teens, but somehow I never came across My Cousin Rachel, so when I saw the film the story was new to me and I really enjoyed it. So I decided to give the book a go. It's one of my 5-star reads for the month. It's really excellent. I love Daphne du Maurier's atmosphere. She brings a wonderful sense of place and atmosphere to all her stories. This one has a sort of gothic thriller kind of twist to it, and by the end, you know, we've got the story being told from a very unreliable narrator in Philip, but by the end, you know, even we're left questioning, did she, didn't she? We don't quite know. Great piece, again a really good character piece. If you haven't seen the film, it's worth seeing the film as well, but if you have seen the film and enjoyed it, the book is definitely worth picking up. Moving on to the next paperback, and this one is The Hollow Crown by Dan Jones. Now, Dan Jones is one of those non-fiction writers I really enjoy, alongside people like Peter Ackroyd and Neil Oliver, because their non-fiction always has a really easygoing prose sense about it. It's the only way I can describe it. You know, some non-fiction, it just gets bogged down in stating all these dry facts. But the thing I like about these 3 guys in particular is they approach it in terms of a story. So this one is obviously, as you might guess from the title, from the Shakespeare little hints, it's to do with the War of the Roses, the rise of the Tudors as a dynasty. And he tells it in chronological order. So you're getting all the viewpoints from the different sides, but the story's moving forward in time. You're not doing a chapter on one, a chapter on the other. So that makes it really highly readable, and you can enjoy this almost as a story, even though it's non-fiction. So this is my other 5-star, I think it's the only other 5-star read for the year. Really great. I mean, I know a fair bit about the War of the Roses, but I still picked up a few new things that I hadn't realised before from this book. Great addition to my library. And moving on to the last one I'm going to wave at you for today. This is Redcoat by Richard Holmes. And this is a look at the British Army, essentially, the British soldier. Well, the subtitle here is The British Soldier in the Age of Horse and Musket. So essentially it's going from the 7-Year War, the French and Indian War, up until around the Crimea. So this is a book I found it really hard to rate because it was fascinating. I mean, there was so much great detail. You can really tell how much the author knows about his subject, how much he loves his subject. However, as we were just discussing a moment ago with non-fiction, he does tend to descend into dry facts a lot. You know, percentages, how many percentage of the soldiers were Irish, how many percentage were this, how many did this, how many did that. It's not chronological, it kind of jumps back and forth talking about different topics. And as such, there were moments when I got a bit bogged down and I just wanted to like flip the page, particularly bearing in mind that I do all my reading at night just before bed. So although I love non-fiction, it has to be the right sort of non-fiction because otherwise it's too much that late at night. You don't want to have to concentrate on just all these details. So brilliantly researched, and if you were looking to write about a soldier in these times, then this would be the book for you. It's a fantastic resource, but it's just not quite as thrilling a read as, say, the Dan Jones there, the Hollow Crown one. As such, I gave it 4 stars. So that brings us to the end of the paperback. So I am going to do a little flip. I will turn the camera off for a second, turn it back on and come back to you with the ebooks, which we can hopefully then fit into a session before the camera decides it's had enough. See you in 2 seconds. And I'm back. Did you miss me? So we're going to carry on now with the ebooks I've read for the month. So just looking here, one of the first ones I read was actually not a full story, just a preview. And it was a sci-fi piece called Autonomous by Annalee Newitz. Now this was only a preview. From memory, I think it was about 80 pages. Really fascinating story though. Set in a future. I'm trying to think of how to describe it without giving too much away. There's a strong dystopian feel about the future, and one of the main characters likes to create drugs. She reverse engineers drugs and sells them on the black market so that the poorer people can afford them, because at the time only the rich can afford the really good drugs. And there's lots of different things about like performance enhancements, and one of these ones that she reverse engineers turns out to have had a fatal flaw in the original drug, and it essentially drives people crazy, and it's meant to make them concentrate on a task and really enjoy doing their work, but it makes them so obsessed on their task that they won't eat, they won't stop, they won't do anything else. That's kind of as far as I got in the story, because obviously it's only a preview. I really enjoyed what I read though. I found the characters well written, the plot idea was very interesting and gripping, and if I got the opportunity I would definitely continue reading this story, and I gave it 4 stars just based on the preview I'd read. So the next one I read was the first in a new YA, what I assume will be a trilogy or series. It was called Second Born, and it's by Amy A. Bartle. This is another 4-star read for me. I've shied away a bit from YA in recent years because at one point I was reading quite a lot, and it got to the point where they did all start to blur into one a little bit. You know, the storylines were so familiar, there was always the love triangle, and it began to get to the point where I couldn't differentiate from one story to another. So I had a break, and I'm just starting to come back to it now, but I'm being really selective about which books I pick up, and I'm just doing an odd 1 or 2 in between other things rather than just slogging YA all the time. This one I enjoyed. Yes, it does have a lot of the traditional elements you'd expect, but then that's what readers are looking for, so we can't kind of discriminate against it for that, I guess you'd say. And there was enough fresh and original ideas that distinguished it from those others. There's an almost love triangle, but it's not really a full love triangle. And the basis of this story is that the firstborn children are the ones that are going to go on and rule, take over from their parents, whether that's in a leadership role or head of a corporation. The secondborns are farmed out, often mostly into the army, because there's a faction of secondborns who are rebelling and they want to change the status quo. So all the secondborns of the families who aren't in rebellion are thrown into the army to fight out the war. So one of the secondborns, we're following her story, and she becomes a kind of figurehead for the rebellion. So I don't want to say too much more and give it away, but it was a really enjoyable story. I liked the characters. There were one or two little things that niggled at me, but nothing major. And it was enjoyable enough that I would definitely be interested in finding out what happens next when the second book comes out. So as I said, 4 stars. The next book was also a 4-star read. I should say that the previous 2 I mentioned came from NetGalley, as does the next one. So this one is The Ghost and Cultural History by Susan Owens. So this was looking at the idea of the ghost, it's non-fiction obviously, how it's been interpreted through history, starting with sort of medieval period, working up to current days. How did people view ghosts? What did they think they were? How did that fit into the social and religious beliefs at the time? This was really fascinating. It was chronological, really well written, nice, easy flowing, plenty of detail, but without bogging you down. And it is a cultural perspective, so they were looking a lot at how did the ghosts feature in books, art, poetry, and later, as we move into the more modern time films, how did that feature and how did that reflect beliefs at the time. So really great book, really interesting. And as I said, 4 stars. So I've got another 3 here coming. All of these are, again, NetGalley reads that I got for free in exchange for a review. So the next one, it was Tudor Fashion by Larry Lynn. 4 stars. So this was a book that focused on court fashion. So it doesn't look at all at the lower class, what the lower classes were wearing. The focus is very much on what the royalty and the higher ranking nobles were wearing. Pretty chronological again, and it was really fascinating. If you're interested in the history of costume and fashion, then this is definitely a book you'd enjoy. Lots of really beautiful illustrations, images of existing garments that have been saved through the centuries, with reflections on the style of dress, the materials used, and often the reason behind it. It went into quite a lot of detail on what was it that made certain kings and queens dress in a particular way, how that reflected the social situation at the time, what they were trying to portray to the people. So a really great book as a slice of history and as a sort of history of costume. And next we moved on to The Witch by Ronald Hutton. So in some ways this was a little bit similar to the Ghost one, except it wasn't quite so much from a cultural point of view, and it was a little bit stodgier. As such, I gave this sort of a 3.5 to a 4 star. It wasn't as readable and easily accessible as the Ghost one. It was very scholarly, so if you're really interested in a hugely scholarly approach to how the witch has been presented in society, what led to witch trials, then this is a great book for you. It kind of starts with a wider picture, worldwide, looks at themes, parallels between different countries and how they viewed witches, plus the differences, of course, between them. Then it zoomed in a little bit to Europe, focused on the European scene, particularly in the early modern, like medieval into the early modern era, and then it zoomed in further to England. So I enjoyed it, I learnt a lot, it was fascinating, but it just wasn't an easy read at times, you know, late at night, 10:30, 11, just before I go to sleep, and trying to slog through all these details about what one essayist said, what another author said, who agreed with whose theory, who disproved someone else's theory. Became a bit much at times, which is why I sort of hovered between the 3.5 to 4, but still very enjoyable. And if you're really a serious student of looking at the idea of witchcraft through the ages, then definitely a book to pick up. And the one I've finished most recently, An Alchemy of Masks and Mirrors by Curtis Craddock. This is another 4-star read for me, and it is, I'd say it's a fantasy steampunk. It's set in a world that's quasi-historical. You can sort of see reflections of European history in it, but it is a fantasy realm, and there are, you know, airships. There's various automatons and people that are sort of part human, part automaton. And it focuses on the princess she's deformed. She doesn't have her family's inherited magic, but she is sent off to marry this prince in another kingdom, and her role is to prevent civil war there. But there's all these machinations going on of all these different factions working in the background, and she, with the help of her faithful musketeer Jean-Claude, has to navigate them. I really enjoyed it. The world building was good. It was nicely interspersed through the story, so you weren't being info dumped, but you gradually built up this sense of the world, the politics, the religion. The characters were all very likeable, stereotypical in a way, particularly Isabella's the, you know, the gutsy heroine, but still really well done. The only thing, there was a couple of things that niggled at me. One of them was that one of the characters suddenly developed feelings for this other character who was dying. Yes, we're giving the sense that she's going to die, but when it gets to the end of the book, at no point does he go back and like, lay flowers on her grave or like mention her again. And I was a bit like, oh, I think he would have. He seemed like the sort of guy who would have gone back and said a final goodbye or something, you know. Plus, the ending for the main character, Isabel, the princess. I also felt that jarred a little bit, and I don't want to go too much into why, because I don't want to give the story away, but she almost ends up with this guy, or it looks like she's going to end up with this guy, and I could see them becoming friends, but I thought the romance felt a little bit forced, particularly because the idea of the two of them together was something some of the factions had been promoting that they'd been against earlier. So I don't want to go into why, because as I said, I don't want to spoil it, but that kind of niggled at me a little bit, but not enough that it ruined the story for me completely. So it's definitely, that made it a solid 4-star. If not for that, it might have pushed to a 5, because it was a very enjoyable read. It kept me turning the pages, and if you're into fantasy, steampunk, adventure stories, then you should definitely check out this book. And that brings me to the last book of the month. Now this is a paperback again. I'm actually going to talk about it now. I haven't actually finished it yet, but I'm filming this, it's the 30th today. So I've got tonight to read and tomorrow night, and I am about a third through, having started it last night. So I do anticipate finishing this month, or at the very worst on the 1st of September. So as such, I'm going to count it as an August read. This book is a big landmark book. It's actually the number 100, book 100 for the year. So once I finish it, that's a big milestone for my yearly goal. It's a biography of Samuel Pepys. And I've now just shut the page in my book without telling you who the author was, which is escaping me at the moment. So wait, bear with me 2 seconds. I'm just going to find it again. And here we go. Claire Tomalin. There we go. Claire Tomalin. So as I said, I'm about a third through. Because it's a non-fiction biography and not a story where I have to wait to see the ending, I feel like I can rate it. And it's definitely going to get a 4-star, maybe a 5. It's a very readable biography. I actually haven't read Samuel Pepys' diary. I've read passages. So I would like to go back and grab a copy and read it more fully. Perhaps not completely fully, but in at least one of the edited, selected versions. I really enjoyed this biography. It's giving you a lot of background. Obviously the Civil War is going on at the time that Samuel Pepys is gradually working his way up the ranks as a clerk. So we get a lot of the politics, what's going on in that sense, which is about where I'm up to at the moment. I mean, I'm just at the point the King, Charles II, is just about to be restored to the throne. And Samuel Pepys has had another career advancement from that. So it's a really readable biography. It's one of those non-fictions that's got a really great storytelling prose style. So if you're interested in the 17th century, it's definitely worth picking up. If you've read some of Pepys' diary, it gives you some great background on him. A couple more things I should tell you to finish. As I said, the Samuel Pepys marks 100 books for me so far this year. Now my goal is usually 150 for the year, and if this were a normal year I would make that. However, I've got a lot of family stuff that's now come up in the last 6 weeks or so of the year. It's going to involve me being in and out a bit. I'm not going to be in my normal every night reading sort of routine. And as such, I have downgraded my goal to 140 because I hate not meeting goals, and it's pretty clear that with all the stuff going on, I'm probably not going to make the 150. So I've gone for 140, which I hope is going to be obtainable. I think if I'm close to the 130 mark by the end of October, then we should be good, or at least around 125. So we'll see. We'll do a bit of an update then and see how things are looking. I do have one special read planned for September and October, which is actually a reread. I don't get a lot of time to reread. There's so many books on my shelves that I would love to reread, particularly some of the classics that I haven't read since I was 15 or so. But I just seem to always have these new books sitting here waiting. So I am doing a reread, and the reread I'm doing is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. The reason for that is the fact that there's been so much news about that book lately because of the TV series that's currently in filming and will be out next year in the UK, and I'll have to wait and see if they show it here. At worst, I'll have to wait for the DVD, but we'll see. And thinking about the characters and the book made me want to reread it, and I saw they were doing a special read-along. Because the action of the book takes place over a 6-week period, they're doing a special read-along where you read certain chapters each day that relate to that day in the timeline of the book. So I haven't done a read-along like this before. I'm really interested and keen to get on with it, and I thought spreading the book out that way and just reading 1 or 2 chapters a day, I can just sit and do that in the afternoon just before dinner or something. I don't have to interrupt my general evening reading with it. So we'll see how it goes, and I'll update you on my progress next time. I think that's about all for today. As we get towards the end of the year, I will be changing my schedule for these videos slightly, just for the last couple of months of the year, but I'll tell you all about that in next month's video. Next month's will be at end of September, same as always. So I will close there for now, but I will talk to you all again soon. Drop me a comment below. Have you read any of the books I've mentioned today? What did you think of them? Or just tell me what you're reading. Perhaps I'll find something new to pick up. Bye for now.